Activists say they're planning to stage peaceful protests at next week's Tour de Yorkshire cycle race. It follows a multi-million-pound sponsorship deal of the sport by the chemical firm INEOs, which has a licence to frack for shale gas in some areas. Now, fracking was one of the issues highlighted by a certain young climate change campaigner when she came to Westminster this week. Paul Murphy reports.
Team Sky is the biggest name in professional cycling, but by next week they'll have a new sponsor in INEOS, a company with licences to explore for shale gas across huge swathes of Yorkshire. Those opposed to fossil fuels, like these protesters east of Hull, have described the sponsorship deal as the worst kind of greenwash.
It gets quite disgusting, actually, if I'm honest. I mean, people talk about greenwashing, but this is it in the extreme. You know, cycling is a good, clean sport. You know, indeed, last year you had the Sky team, you know, and on their jerseys talking about not using single-use plastic and making a big campaign about it, which Chris Froome had supported. And now you've got a company who are literally making these plastics.
The protests planned for next week's Tour de Yorkshire are unlikely to be on the scale of the Extinction Rebellion climate change demonstrations seen in London in recent weeks. But Rosemary, who's now back home in Lincoln after taking part in those protests, says the spirit behind them is the same.
It seems, ironically, that by letting them sponsor this, it's given them the oxygen of publicity when they're actually one of the biggest producers of carbon dioxide in this country. So I would say it would be better if we didn't support them.
And visiting London this week, Greta Thunberg, the Swedish teen activist, had a withering assessment of our government's enthusiasm for fracking.
The UK's active current support of new exploitations of fossil fuels, like, for example, the UK shale gas fracking industry, the expansion of this North Sea. This ongoing irresponsible behaviour will no doubt be remembered in history as one of the greatest failures of humankind.
Back in Tour de Yorkshire territory, Nick Howard, the owner of Castle Howard, is fearful that his 8,000-acre estate could be targeted for shale gas, and he too could join the sponsorship protest.
What they're doing, of course, is they're trying to make themselves look softer and fluffier. The whole business of fracking does create seismic activity. I don't want to see our wonderful Hawksmoor mausoleum collapsing completely because of it.
Billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe, the Beverley-born boss of INEOS, is also a keen cyclist. It's understood his company is pumping £120 million into the new team.
And so the petrochemical giant that wants to frack this county could soon become a key player in the development of a sustainable form of transport. It's fair to say that when Team INEOS hits these roads next week, not everyone will be giving it a warm welcome to Yorkshire.
In a statement, the organisers of the Tour de Yorkshire said, "We understand the complex issues around fracking and remain in close contact with the national parks and local authorities. As a tourism body, we organise the Tour de Yorkshire to promote the county to a worldwide audience and have no control over the sponsorship of the teams taking part." INEOS has not been available for comment, but will launch its new team at an event on May the 1st. Where environmental groups say they will stage a peaceful demonstration.
That was Paul Murphy reporting, and we're also joined in the studio by Holly Andrews from Extinction Rebellion Youth. Welcome to the Sunday Politics. Is it fair for protesters to use a sporting event to make their point, do you believe?
I think so in the case of this. I think the fact that INEOS is sponsoring the cycling event, it kind of goes against the whole kind of thing around the cycling in general. And I mean, INEOS has already sponsored Ben Aisley, and I think it's just a perfect example of greenwashing, really. I think he's completely trying to cover his tracks, Jim Ratcliffe, and make it look like INEOS is a company that is sponsoring something that is environmentally friendly, but really it's just hiding the fact that they want to frack in Yorkshire and they produce plastics.
Well, Kevin Hillenrick, your constituency has been centre stage in the debate around fracking. Can you accept the widespread anger over this?
Well, INEOS do things other than fracking. They employ 17,000 people, but the issue of fracking, to me, makes sense. It is not about increasing the amount of fossil fuels we use. It's about burning UK-produced fossil fuels rather than putting it in a tanker in Qatar, cooling it to 170 degrees below zero and shipping it into the UK. So we will need gas under any circumstance for 2 or 3 decades. I'm a massive supporter of renewables. The UK is one of the world leaders in terms of renewables. That's the reality.
But can you understand why people are using the Tour de Yorkshire to protest?
Well, yes, of course. Listen, of course, I listened to the protests last week, and I listened to Greta Thunberg as well, and I welcome people raising awareness of this issue. As I say, we need to do an awful lot more. I've written to the Prime Minister saying we should go to net zero much sooner than we expected by 2050, that we should have onshore wind back in the planning regime. So lots of things we need to do we're not doing now. But simply saying this is about INEOs producing plastic, if there's no market for plastic, INEOs won't produce it. I think it is missing
well, it's about fracking,
the point
somewhat. Yeah, it's, the Thirsk and Malton constituency Labour Party, Tracy Bravian, have called for the INEOS branding to be removed from the Tour. Is that something you support?
Well, certainly. First off, we really celebrate the Tour de Yorkshire, and it came through Batley and Spen last time, and it was brilliant for businesses and brilliant for the community, and something we really celebrate. And whilst there is the debate around INEOS, I'd also like to say that Jim Ratcliffe, there is a debate to have at another time, probably, about sponsorship from people who have moved their business outside the UK in order to avoid tax, in the way that we now no longer have tobacco companies sponsoring sporting events, because the Labour Party is against fracking, and will listen absolutely closely to local people who want our support in that regard. I would say that if you have a sponsorship deal, you probably want your logo on it, so they'd have to have conversations about how we get across that, because it is a massive amount of money.
He hasn't moved his business outside the UK. He employs 17,000 people in the UK.
No,
He's moved
I
himself
understand that.
outside
Yes,
the UK, which
so he's
tax
in
avoidance
order to
reasons,
save
which
£4 billion
I'm totally against.
paying in tax, which is substantial.
That's an interesting debate, one we will come back to another time.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Paul Scriven, we've seen protests over Brexit. We're seeing, of course, climate change protests on a big scale now. Is this because, do you believe many people have lost faith in mainstream politics? Is that why they're taking to the streets?
I think that protest is a part of mainstream politics. In a democratic society, if people have a beef about something, as long as it's legal, they're absolutely entitled to go out and protest. And Holly and her colleagues have got every right to protest against what's happening with the sponsorship and fracking. That's no problem at all, as long as it's legal. And it actually then hits people like myself and the MPs and actually make sure that we're on the ball. So I think it's a good thing in a democratic society and not something which should be poo-pooed.
Holly, are the people sat alongside you here today, are they the problem or are they the solution?
Well, I think they're part of the solution, but also part of the problem at the moment. But can I just reply to a point that was made earlier about, sorry, it was a point that you made about how we should be getting fossil fuels from our country instead of shipping them over from, say, Qatar. But currently, the people that are dying from climate change, the people in the global south, and we need to start looking, instead of looking at ourselves as nation states, looking holistically together as a human race.
I want to hear from Holly again in a bit, but first we're going to hear from the Green Party and their MP, Caroline Lucas, and she was asked this week whether the climate change protests in London and the disruption they caused were justified.
I recognise that people are being inconvenienced by what's happening, and I am genuinely sorry for that, and I know others are too. But when you compare that to the inconvenience of climate catastrophe, when you've got David Attenborough saying that, we could be talking about, millions of refugees, the inconvenience to their lives as a result of climate change, the changes that will happen as a result of a warming world are going to be overwhelming unless we act very, very fast. And I think that's the perspective in which we need to be looking at this.
So that was Caroline Lucas from the Green Party. Holly Andrews, are we going to see more direct action on the streets from organisations like the one you represent?
I think absolutely. I think the protests that have been happening in London over the last couple of weeks, that's not the end at all. It's just the beginning. It's gaining traction. People are finally starting to wake up and realise that we are in a state of climate emergency, and if we don't act accordingly, then we're going to face absolute catastrophe. We already are. And I think people using roadblocks and using their own bodies to basically get in the way and cause disruption is the only way we're going to do that.
Would people, OK, we saw what happened in London, would people in, Leeds, Sheffield, Hull, places closer to home here, would they accept that? Do you really think they would sympathise with you?
I think so. Extinction Rebellion Leeds has got over 1,000 likes on Facebook. It's growing all the time. We saw the youth strikes that happen in Leeds. They've been going amazingly. There's definitely a massive hub for it in the north as well. It's not all about being based in London. There's loads of action happening up here as well.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all for your thoughts.